Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a familiar place to viewers of this channel. If you think Montana is a hotbed of bear attacks now, back in the 1800s it was even more so. Just a few miles north of Butte is a small dot of a town called Warm Springs. Back then it was even less of a dot than the dot it is now. The geography here is steep rocky mountains with valleys filled with thick stands of pine, fir, and spruce trees. All along the waterways of the area, aspen trees and willow bushes blot out any chance to see for more than a few yards. Serviceberries, chokecherries, and wild currants abound in this dense screen of scrub. In this area, white-tailed deer, elk, and moose are plentiful, but back in the 1800s, the most dangerous animals were bears. Peter Haelstrom was a recent immigrant from Sweden. He had heard of the opportunities the U.S. offered immigrants and envisioned finding a way to establish a ranch here. His main goal was to bring his beautiful wife over after he bought some land, and together they would make a family. He arrived in America in mid-July of 1888 and immediately saw wanted posters offering enough reward money to get him well along on his goal to ranch ownership. By fall, Haelstrom had partnered with two other Swedes in the area to form a bounty hunting party. Haelstrom had offered Christian Jorgensen and Andrew Peterson a big chunk of the money he had hoped to earn after the optimistic young men killed the bear on the wanted poster, but they refused the offer. They would accompany their friend and wanted him to keep the money to fulfill his dream. Herds of local stockmen around Warm Springs, Montana were being harassed by a giant cinnamon bear. This bear would attack area livestock, eat his fill, then disappear before the ranch hands could kill it. Hunters would follow its track, but the bear always managed to stay a step ahead of them. More than a few hunters, motivated by the reward money, returned from the mountains disappointed, exhausted, and empty-handed. The bear was harder to find than a black cat in a cave. The area ranchers eventually raised the reward for the black bear's hide to $100, and that was all the motivation Haelstrom and his friends needed. The Swedes headed out in the morning of September 15th from Warm Springs and went north toward the foothills of Mount Powell. After the hunters crossed a pasture called Peterson's Field, a pair of huge bear tracks were found, pressed deeply into the muddy soil. The sheer size of this bear was enough to rile the hunters up, and they quickly set out to follow the tracks. As the bear's tracks meandered toward Mount Powell, the hunters followed it through all kinds of brush and bushes, over barren hills and through forests. The tracks were a day or so old, and were spaced such that the men knew the bear was moving slowly. It had killed a cow a few days prior, and was still full of the meat, on which it had gorged itself. After a few more hours of following the bear tracks, the men could see that they were now very fresh. The bear had apparently laid up for a day's rest, which allowed the men to make up a lot of ground as they followed it. Haelstrom took the lead with his friends following close behind him. They pushed their way through brush and reeds while following the giant bear tracks. Once Haelstrom had looked up, he realized he'd nearly walked right up to the giant bear. The surprised and angry bear immediately rose upright while still squatted on its haunches. It swiped at the air between Haelstrom and it, only 10 feet away from the hunter. Haelstrom knew he likely had only a few seconds to react before the bear would disappear into the brush. He quickly raised his rifle to his shoulder and took aim. His rifle cracked as the ball seared its path toward the bear's chest. The ball ammunition from Haelstrom's gun had struck home, and the impact temporarily froze the bear. After the brief pause, the bear let out a low growl before disappearing into the brush, away from the men. Haelstrom, Jorgensen, and Peterson were excited to see the impact of the bullet, and energetically looked at each other before searching for a blood trail. This time Peterson took the lead as the group of hunters searched for the bear. Haelstrom brought up the rear of the pack as the men followed each spatter of blood found along the tracks. They could see the bear's tracks slowing as the distance between each impression grew shorter and shorter. With any luck, the giant bear would be piled up behind the next clump of brush. Little did the men know, the massive bear had doubled back and ran in a circle around its pursuers, and was now behind them. As Haelstrom pushed his way through the reeds and brush, he heard a short moan very near and behind him. Haelstrom backtracked a few steps and was blindsided by the big bear. Before Haelstrom could react, the bear swung one of its massive paws, tipped with long, sharp claws, across his face. The blow knocked him to his back and nearly severed his upper lip from his face. One of the bear's claws raked across his nose, ripping it from side to side, In the same motion, another one of the bear's claws ripped open a gash that went from Haelstrom's ear all the way down his neck and across his chest. Now looking up at the bear, Haelstrom tried to raise his rifle, but the bear growled as it opened its mouth over his face. The enraged bear wrapped its massive jaws across Haelstrom's cheekbones and bit down. After locking its jaws onto his head, it shook back and forth violently. Jorgensen and Peterson could see the bear as it stood over Haelstrom. They witnessed their friend as the bear clamped its jaws onto his face and shook him. They had plenty of opportunity to shoot the bear, but were too afraid that they may hit Haelstrom. They held their fire and watched as the bear released Haelstrom and stood over him, growling and staring menacingly. Just then Peterson saw a great opportunity to fire at the bear. He shouldered his rifle and fired a second lead ball into the bear. His shot struck the bear with a resounding smack. As soon as the ball shot struck the bear, it reared up on its hind legs. It towered over the men and was an awesome sight to behold. Suddenly the bear collapsed on top of Haelstrom. Neither the bear nor Haelstrom moved in the mass of bear and man. Peterson and Jorgensen ran over and grabbed a hold of the bear. They could hardly move the giant as its bulk completely covered Haelstrom. After rolling the bear off their friend, Jorgensen and Peterson were met with a gruesome sight. They could see that Haelstrom's scalp had been completely peeled toward the back of his skull. His skull cap was splintered, and beneath it was a mass of blood and tissue. They noted that jelly-like particles were visible in their friend's skull wounds. Jorgensen and Peterson knew that they had to get Haelstrom back to medical help as fast as possible. They gathered 2 long pine boughs and used their coats to complete the improvised litter for their friend. A faint heartbeat could be picked up by Haelstrom's friends. They packed Haelstrom out several miles back to Warm Springs. They knew Dr. Mussingbrod was a good doctor. Unfortunately for Haelstrom, the surgeon was not in the office and nowhere to be found. Jorgensen and Peterson borrowed a nearby wagon and quickly pointed their horses north 5 miles to the hospital at Deer Lodge. The Swedes brought Haelstrom to Sisters Hospital and put him under the care of Dr. A.H. Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell could do very little for Haelstrom as his condition was so terrible. The medical staff cleaned Haelstrom's wounds and comforted him as he lay unconscious for a while. When he woke up, he whispered to the doctor and asked him if he was going to die through his torn lips. The doctor informed Haelstrom that he believed that the young man was going to die, and watched as he closed his eyes. Haelstrom continued to breathe in short, shallow breaths. Just before he passed away, Haelstrom opened his eyes, and he said, "Well, I guess I killed that bear anyhow." Haelstrom was buried, and his widow was sent a letter explaining the death of her husband. The tragic story of Peter Haelstrom is just one of many in the annals of Montana history. After reviewing the details of this attack, I have a few questions for you. Given that Haelstrom was from Sweden, he was experienced with bears. Why do you think the young men followed the bear so closely instead of waiting for it to bleed out? Do you think a dog would have alerted the men that the bear was circling around behind them? Would you go into a dense stand of reeds and bushes to find a wounded bear for enough money to buy a ranch? I will be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to Ewe Creek in Denali National Park in Alaska. Now, I know that we have discussed many bear attacks in this area recently, but this area is a hot zone of bear and human conflict at times. The geography here is rolling hills of tundra as this area lies on the north slope of the park. At the ground level, visibility can be minimal and animals can appear and disappear at will. In the forest, we would call the higher levels of foliage a canopy, but in the tundra, what we would think of as a canopy may only be 10 feet high. Common plants in this area are Arctic willow and cottongrass, with numerous berry bushes dotting the space in between. Wildflowers bear their beautiful blooms in short summers and prepare for an early winter each year. The animals in the area include caribou, Arctic wolves, Arctic foxes, muskox, and numerous dangerous grizzly bears. On July 12, 1949, a 22-year-old United States Geological Survey employee by the name of Jack Reed was performing duties on a slope of the tundra of Ewe Creek. His responsibilities took him into the bush as part of basic research and data collection for the agency. As he crested a small rise, he walked a few yards before he noticed 3 large dark shapes a short distance away, out of the corner of his eye. As he turned his head, 3 grizzly bears came into focus. He instantly knew he was far too close for comfort, and that this situation could turn very bad, very quickly if the bears did not choose to flee upon sight of a human being. He had seen bears in the wild before, and had seen the fluid and stunning speed with which they covered ground. It was rare to see any grizzly spend even a few seconds in human presence. They almost always turned and ran, or at least immediately walked out of the area. Reed knew that the distance between them would be erased in a matter of only a few seconds and prepared to do something drastic if he needed to. As he froze in an attempt to avoid drawing the bear's attention, one of them looked up from nibbling something on the ground. As soon as the large grizzly locked eyes with Reed, he knew how the situation would unfold. With its head held high, the grizzly huffed and alerted the other two bears, which were only a few yards away. Reed could see the bear pull its rear legs beneath it as it prepared to take the first powerful bounds toward him. As the grizzly stretched out its paws in his direction, Reed was filled with terror and awe at the seriousness of his predicament. As I have reported before, time slows down in bear attack victims' minds sometimes. In the split second, before the bear steamed toward him, Reed thought back at exactly what he saw when he crested the knoll. He remembered how the three bears seemed to be two full-grown bears, and one smaller bear that was likely a cub of one of the others. He knew of the protective nature of sow grizzlies, and that this attack might end in a bluff charge, but if it didn't, well, let's not think of that option yet. The grizzly had bounded a few yards toward him by the time Reed considered his options. Bear spray had not been invented yet, and he was not carrying a firearm, so his only options were slim to none. Playing dead was not really a common concept at the time, so Reed turned and sprinted toward a nearby 20-foot-high cliff. The downhill slant in the hill helped him run faster than he knew he was capable of doing. The cliff approached him rapidly, but the bear closed on him even faster. Reed navigated the bushy undergrowth in the same manner the bear did, by running right over anything in his path. Fortunately for him, all the plants in his path were small enough to permit this. As Reed approached the cliff edge, he prepared to blindly leap toward the bottom, having no idea what lay at the bottom. For all he knew, it was only a few feet, and would only grant him a brief chance at evading attack from the grizzly. Reed drove his knee high on his last step to propel him off the cliff as fast and as far as possible. Just then, the grizzly was a mere foot behind him, and it desperately swatted at him as he was mid-jump. The immense paw of the grizzly sliced across Reed's lower back just as he leaped from the cliff edge, opening up several slashing puncture wounds as its claws tore their way through his flesh. Reed was propelled even faster in his fall after the bear swatted him in the back. He tumbled through the air, waving his arms and kicking his feet in desperation to maintain his balance. Staring toward the base of the cliff, he could see the ground approaching very rapidly. He braced himself for what would be an enormous impact. Reed crashed into the sloped ground and rolled to a stop. As he looked up toward the top of the cliff, he could see the bear glaring down at him. To his terror, the bear didn't simply give up and walk away. It turned toward a circuitous route to the bottom to continue its attack on him. As the bear blurred through the brush toward him, Reed decided the only thing he could do was run. He didn't have time to assess if he was injured in his leap from the cliff, but instantly began sprinting for his life. Reed bobbed and weaved through brush and bush alike, with the bear closing in on him. His saving grace was that the bear would regularly have to stop to search for him, before dashing toward him after relocating him. The bushes screened his escape, allowing him to maintain a short cushion of distance between him and the pursuing grizzly. As he ran, Reed slowly lost the grizzly. After an intense and confusing pursuit, the grizzly turned around and returned to the top of the cliff, apparently rejoining the two other bears. Reed eventually made his way back to his vehicle. He assessed the gashes made on his back from the bear's angry swipe at him as he leaped from the top of the cliff. After arriving at his vehicle, Reed made his way to the hospital where his injuries received medical care. Although Reed committed one of the cardinal sins to be avoided during a bear attack by running, the bushes and brush screening him allowed him to avoid being further injured by the grizzly. Conventional wisdom says that his best option was to drop flat on the ground and play dead, but this undoubtedly would have led to him being mauled severely or even killed. The presence of the cub and the close proximity of the bears when Reed crested the hill created a very dangerous situation that doesn't often end well. It is obviously not recommended to run from any bear today, but before safe guidelines for handling bear encounters were established, many people responded with their survival instinct. This may have kept our ancient ancestors alive, but only the fast or lucky ones. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. What do you think Reed could have done to avoid surprising the grizzlies before cresting the hill? Do you think the bear would have mauled or killed him if he hadn't jumped from the cliff? Do you think running into bushes will be the next evolution in avoiding a bear attack? I will be glad to read and reply to your comments, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to Trail Creek in the Flathead National Forest, just west of the border of Glacier National Park. In the park, grizzly bears have a wilderness preserve set aside for them to live as they always have, but the area west of Polebridge is even less populated by people, with fewer roads. It is lower in elevation and lush with thick, uninterrupted forests of pine, fir, and spruce trees, mixed in with small stands of aspen trees. Willow bushes crowd the banks of creeks and streams, along with tens of species of berry bushes. The geography around Camp Creek, which is just a few miles north of Polebridge, is rolling hills covered in dense forests. This area has a lot of deer, elk, and moose roaming the forests, and predators like cougars, wolves, coyotes, bobcats, and black bears hunt the shadows. The area grizzly bears have recently begun developing a hostile conflict with people visiting their territory. Along Trail Creek is a place where the stream submerges and travels a short distance underground. Where it reemerges is called the bubble-ups. Trail Creek disappears into porous soil and travels through underground channels until it is pushed to the surface by an underlying layer of non-porous rock, like granite. When the water emerges, it does so at such a rate that it bubbles like a spring, but is in fact Trail Creek. It is a popular place to visit just to observe the natural phenomenon. Remote cabins dot the vicinity, and one of them is owned by an elderly couple, whom we will call David and Denise. As of the compilation of this video, their actual names have not been released, and their desires for privacy will be respected. Many of the cabins in this area are off-grid, or may not have telephone service. There is a certain population along Trail Creek Road that likes it that way and has moved here for a more private and unsophisticated life. On October 1st, 2023, David and Denise were walking their dog along the banks of Trail Creek. Near its origin, Trail Creek lies within a shallow but steep drop-off for much of its course. Thick brush grows along the banks and limits sight to just a few feet in most places. This area isn't exactly easy to get to, so visitors can frequently have the view to themselves and enjoy relative privacy. Around 3 p.m., Denise was near the road and presumed to be on her way back to their car, when a bear blurred from the brush from only a few feet away. The bear knocked her down and began to bite her. Given the couple resided in this area, they had come prepared with bear spray. Upon seeing the bear closing in on his wife, David was quick to react. He unholstered the bear spray that he was carrying and doused the bear as it began its attack on Denise. As the thick orange cloud billowed from the canister and enveloped the area surrounding the bear, the effects of the spray began to set in. The bear began to sneeze, cough, and shake its head, trying to get the irritant out of its mucosal membranes. Undoubtedly, its eyes, nasal cavities, and mouth burned sharply. This overwhelmingly offensive sensation makes bears, and just about any other animal, reconsider the behavior that led up to the situation. In fact, it frequently makes them consider their location, and they change that very quickly. The bear backed away immediately, leaving Denise in agony from the wounds the bear inflicted in its very short attack as well as the bear spray. David looked around to make sure the bear stayed gone and quickly helped Denise back to her feet. She was bleeding and struggled to walk. Together they limped their way back to their car while continually checking over their shoulder. After helping Denise get into their car, David sped down the winding and bumpy backwoods road. He knew they needed to alert authorities and request medical help for Denise. Officials had to be alerted about the bear and its aggressive behavior, and Denise's injuries definitely needed medical attention. David drove them back to where they could pick up a cell signal, and once in range, dialed 911 to get the news of their confrontation with the bear out. He called in for medical help at their location, and was told they should wait for a medical helicopter to arrive with paramedics. A medical response helicopter from the Advanced Life Support and Emergency Rescue Team was dispatched to their location and flew her to the Logan Health Medical Center in Kalispell. Her condition hasn't been released yet, and the seriousness of her injuries is still being kept private. Following this attack, the area around Bubble Ups, including North Fork Road, has been closed until further notice. As you can see by the aerial picture, the closure covers somewhere around 100 square miles. The authorities do this to allow the bear to calm down following the run-in and to prevent more people from being injured by the bear. Additional people in the area may cause the bear to leave, and this would prevent bear researchers from trapping it and learning from it.
The incident is still under investigation at the time of the recording of this video, and the bear remains at large, having not been found by researchers. On this channel, we have discussed many attacks in which dogs were present, and this episode is no exception. Reports of how dogs may exacerbate encounters with bears have been noted as well. After doing some research on this topic, I have some potentially valuable information for you. The data really culminates in the importance of a dog depending on its breed. Many dogs react to a bear according to their protective nature, making sure their human is aware of the bear, or even to protect them. There are several breeds that are specifically bred to handle confrontations with bears. The breed that kept coming up in my research is a dog called the Anatolian Shepherd. This breed is a large-framed dog and rugged in its build and demeanor. Lauren Stoddard is a rancher in northwest Montana, near ground zero of grizzly bear activity and confrontations with people. She states that when properly trained, the dogs will actually train grizzlies that wander onto her ranch to look elsewhere for food. She reported that her 8-month-old Anatolian Shepherd once single-handedly turned a grizzly away from her goat herd. In incidents involving black bears between the years of 2010 through 2015, about 46% of dogs involved in altercations were injured. Their owners fared much worse, with 62% of people involved in such attacks being injured. Most of the dogs were off-leash when the confrontation happened, so researchers advise that people keep their dogs on non-retractable leashes as much as possible while in bear country. The report with more valuable details has been linked below for your review, so please check it out. When you adventure out this fall, remember to follow these guidelines. Most bear attacks occur when people approach their food or their cubs or get too close. Authorities recommend speaking gently to the bear while avoiding direct or prolonged eye contact. Slowly wave your arms and avoid high-pitched screams or rapid movements. Hiking in groups is much safer than being alone, and looking big or standing in a higher position may help reduce the possibility of a bear attack. Don't turn your back on a bear and retreat slowly in a sideways manner while keeping an eye on the bear. They also note that climbing a tree may not keep you safe, as both grizzlies and black bears can also do so. If you are a hunter, their advice is as follows. Carry bear spray and be effective in using it. Watch for bear sign like scat or torn up deadfall trees or ant hills. When approaching creeks, be cautious, as bears cannot hear much better than people can, and the noise of the water may screen your approach. Hunt in groups and make noise to alert nearby bears. Be aware that animal calls like elk bugles can attract bears as well as cover scents. Quickly remove your meat and depart the area once you harvest your game animal. If you have to leave a portion of your game animal for later retrieval, make sure that you leave it in a place clearly visible upon your return. Use binoculars or other optical enhancement before you approach to scan for bears guarding the carcass. If the carcass has been disturbed, leave the area immediately and contact authorities for further assistance. After reviewing the details of this attack, I have a few questions for you. Do you think the bear that attacked Denise was a grizzly or a black bear? What contributing factors can you think of that led to the attack? If David hadn't used bear spray, would his wife have been more seriously injured or killed? I will be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.